Hi, welcome to the NASCAR and NBC podcast. I'm your host, Nate Ryan. We're here at the halfway mark of the 2024 Cup Series playoffs. 5 races down, 5 races to go. And to discuss what we've seen so far in the playoffs and during the 2024 season, it's NASCAR and NBC analyst Steve Letarte. Stevie, just want to start with, I think maybe the biggest trend we've seen in the playoffs so far has been 3 non-playoff drivers having won in Ricky Stenhouse Jr., Ross Chastain, Chris Buescher. There was so much talk coming in the playoffs this year about it being wild card in the first couple of rounds because you had 2 drafting tracks with Atlanta now in there, and you had 2 road courses with Watkins Glen also being in the first round, adding to Talladega and the Roval. Was this somewhat to be expected that we might see some non-playoff drivers winning because of the way the schedule laid out?
I think this is the new world of NASCAR. I think the schedule is some of it. The car is some of it. I think the equality of teams front to back in the garage is some of it. Now, I'm not going to say they're all the exact same. That would be a lie. I still think Hendrick and Gibbs and Penske probably lead others 23-11, nipping on their heels. But, I mean, it's not just playoffs. I mean, look at the number of teams. I think we've had like 18 different winners this year. You know, it has become, like every good bowl of soup, the ingredient, it's not one ingredient that's the star, it's this mix. And I think that's where people get lost in this. I could go to, the crazy word in NASCAR today, the charter or the business model, I think has done a lot of this. It has, from when I took over in television in 2015, when I moved to the booth, to now, I just give it the eye test. And 5 laps into a run, 10 laps, 20 laps, 30 laps, first to 30th is closer than it's ever been at every track we go to. Just the cars are closer together, which tells me that they're all running similar speeds. I think the business has something to do with that. The car, having the opportunity to buy the same parts. Once again, I don't believe they're all the same. There are cars faster than others. Kyle Larson doesn't lead 461 laps at Bristol if everybody's driving IROC cars. That's not what happens. So I believe the car has something to do with it. And then the talent. I think the world, as we see in other sports with more international players playing in the U.S., right? I think the world itself has a bigger reach. And I think you have a better kind of deeper field of race car drivers. And then throw that schedule in. And I do believe if we ran mile and a halfs every week, we wouldn't have this same variety of winners. But I do think because of the variety of schedule and everything else I already listed, this is what you're going to have, which is great for the fan. And it's more stressful for the playoffs guys because now, very few of those golden tickets have been handed out.
Yeah, and I'm glad you delved into this because this was on my list, talking about, I don't know if parity is the right word for it, but the last 9 races have been won by 9 different teams. That's the longest streak since 10 straight over the 2001-2002 season. So we're seeing the type of, I guess, spread of victories here that we haven't seen in almost a generation. In the last 9 races, there have been 9 different winners. And 9 drivers this season have broken winless streaks of at least 42 races. So you kind of talked about it there a little bit, Steve. It sounds like it's a confluence of things, but can a lot of it be chalked up to the next gen and the fact that teams seem to be a little bit more closer in terms of what they have access to in terms of equipment?
So I don't like the word parity. I like the word opportunity. And I think that's really what we're seeing. I don't think that NASCAR has delivered such restrictive setups and such restrictive cars that everybody runs the same speed no matter what you do. Because if that's the case, you should talk to Legacy Motor Club that are letting people go and rearranging and firing people, or talk to the Wood brothers who are, changing. Even though the driver won a race, they're making a driver change next year. And Stewart Haas is shutting down. It's easy to talk parity or opportunity if you want to talk the front of the field. But let's talk the middle or the back of the field. To say it's parity and it's only the car is a slap in the face of Spire Motorsports, who has ground and fought tooth and nail both on and off the racetrack. That's the part everyone misses. What Spire has done off the racetrack by bringing in Gainbridge and partners and financing and buying buildings and hiring people. They just don't start running inside the top 10 because, the car allowed it. It's like, this is a human sport. It always will be. I love the technology. I grew up in the technology. I think the technology should be shared and celebrated and shown to the world because it's way higher technology than people think. We're not driving stock cars out of the showroom in 1965 anymore, and that's okay. We could lean into what's different about them. But the humans make the difference. The people always will. And I think what you see isn't parity, it's opportunity. And I think that we are starting to see teams that are starting to realize that. There's this, I think there was a little bit of a dip for personnel. And now, even with SHR shutting down, which is crazy to say that there's this big influx of people on the market, I think teams are internally looking around going, well, I can improve position A with player B. So I'm going to go get him from another race team. And we're going to start trying to figure out who knows how to put the Lego blocks together better. Because while the car is a bit like a set of Legos, it doesn't come with instructions. And I think that's what everybody forgets, right? Like all the pieces are there, but your statue and mine are going to look very different, Nate, because we don't know how to put them together. And I think that's the same way for these teams. Now, it's harder for the fan because the differences went from inches to, thousandths of an inch. And the wins on the racetrack have gone from seconds to hundredths of a second. And I think those equate to one another. And look out the window, it's amazing. I mean, it's spectacular. What we saw at Talladega was a level of display of driver talent that I think should be celebrated.
The differences between those cars, can you see them? Like when you're walking around the garage and you look at a Spire car versus a Hendrick car versus an RFK car versus a Joe Gibbs racing car, can you spot like the little differences?
No, without the proper tools and access, they all look the same. Even to someone who's been in the garage for 30 years. Now there's fit and finish on a few of them, right? There's just some cars you can kind of get far enough back where you start to see some cars and you go, man, that car, even the obvious things, the fit and the finish are just kind of okay. But it's kind of like building a house, right? Once you get to a certain level of carpenter, I don't know if you or I could tell the difference between a mid-level carpenter and the best carpenter in the world, other than, it looks great. It's nailed together and everything looks like it fits. So there are a few cars every once in a while that show up and the seams aren't quite like you'd like, or the parts and pieces aren't quite like you want. But the nuances of this car are not just hidden by access. Most of them are in the underbody. Most of them are in the details that you can't see. But also you have to use the tools. And I think that's where NASCAR, inspection has shifted dramatically to a technical light scanning situation and all that, because even the NASCAR officials, you can't see what makes cars faster than others. But I can assure the fan, just because you can't see it, it's there. They're not all the same.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't hear as much about that, Steve, as we did a few years ago, when every team was getting its own optical scanning station and NASCAR was changing its inspection. I feel like we hear less about that than we used to then. Is that just because teams all adapted to it? It's just become, standard procedure. It's the business. Yeah.
Well, think about that. Think about the first time somebody said, think of COVID. I use COVID. Hey, we're going to get on a video call. Like, oh no, video call. How am I going to video call? Video call? How do you video call? I don't know. Now Zoom, even if you're not using Zoom, Zoom is like Google. Zoom is now like a descriptor. You might even not even mean like Zoom program, but hey, let's get on a Zoom. Well, that means we're going to video call. And now I got 9 different programs on my computer. I can video call 16 different ways. Like, it's great. And we don't talk about that anymore because it's now the status quo, right? This is like ordering off Amazon or getting on a video call, or the first time your doctor said, oh no, you have to look at your lab results on an app. I'm no longer going to send you an email or a letter confirmation. Thus is life that we all live and every listener lives. Now, if I have to call to make a reservation, I'm so irritated because I'm like, man, I can just do this on Open Table. Why do I have to call the restaurant? This is the new NASCAR. Everything you just listed, all the technology, all the equipment, it was new. Now it is just what we do. Now it is the sport in general. And I'm a big believer there's some other areas of the sport that need to take that same technological shift. It's time to keep up with everything else. I think the fan at home who watches other sports is entertained by how it's covered and officiated and all of that. And I think NBC has done a great job and invested a lot of money in like our cutaway car and all these things, not because you at home need to know what a toe link is, but because if I'm going to say it, I should show you. You don't have to go sit at the water cooler and talk to your buddies about a broken toe link, but I shouldn't use vernacular that you're like, I have no idea what he's talking about. He's talking in Latin. So we try to just, show the fans the parts and pieces that do make the difference.
Yeah. And is that what you mean when you say other areas that you want to see that technological shift? It's that explanatory
officiating. I think I'm the guy, and I have to applaud our bosses because I'm all the ideas we come up with, they support. I'm struggling to know the next way to show the race in a strategic manner because I watched this beautiful race kind of unfold. And it's kind of like the first time you watch the Tour de France, you're like, okay, wait a second. I don't get it. There are leaders, then there's this peloton, then there's a chase group. Why don't the guys up front just bike away? Like, why don't they just pedal faster? Just go away. I'm saying this simply, but you know what I mean? Like, if you watch a sport for the first time, you don't understand. And as the sport shifts, I believe the NASCAR fans are the best fans in the world, and they are owed a true explanation of what's happening on the racetrack, even if it isn't two cars side by side on fire, right? If it is a strategic outcome or a plan, if it's our responsibility to cover the event as the event is being raced. And, I'm gonna have to give them credit. NASCAR, our bosses at NBC, everybody is all for that. I'm just still trying to come up with the best way that, my goal is, this is awful for the guy that talks on TV. And shame on me for saying this. I want you to be able to go in, sit down at a bar with no audio, look up and know everything that's going on. I don't want to have to explain it. I want you to look at the screen and be like, oh, okay, so this guy's leading. This guy has to pit. This guy needs tires. This guy doesn't. I want all that to just be naturally just displayed on the screen, but it's very hard to do.
Yeah. What's the number one area that you want to attack on that front? Is there like one
the biggest thing capsule? Is just, so here's what I would say. If you and I walked into a bar, we'll use Major League Baseball, they're in the playoffs, and we look up in a very short manner. I mean, by the time we're halfway through our first beer, we know probably what series it is, how many games it is. This is all the information that's on the screen. Who's leading the series, what the two teams are, what inning we're in, what the score is, who's on base, how many outs. It's all there. It's natural. And regardless of the network that covers it, while it might have a different color, it's kind of all still there. So for racing, we do a good job of showing, hey, here's the running order. Here's what lap we're on. And we've seen it some with our little green and yellow and red checks and percentage of like fuel and tires. I'm just trying to have that more just normal. Like, everybody gets in their car at home and they look down and see a gas gauge and they go, okay, I need to get gas. I want to have gas gauges and tire gauges, or let's say probability. Like, when we're in a green flag cycle and this guy is leading, it's we should show him because he's leading. But I'm like, hey, guys, this is like a farce, right? This guy's leading, but he has to pit. So we're going to focus on these other two guys for the win, because that is the win. This guy's just out here. So I want somebody who tunes in who says, all right, so, Joe Smith is leading, but why aren't you showing him? Oh, because his fuel gauge is on red. We're going to show you the two guys that the fuel gauge is on green. Just try to make it more intuitive.
Yeah. Going back to what you're saying about the opportunity for teams to win, like we haven't seen in a while. And, the numbers I stated, 9 straight different winners and 18 winners over the course of the season so far. You mentioned it, like Stewart-Haas Racing's closure will flood the market with a few hundred more employees and even more talent coming out. But there was a lot of talk, Stevie, when the next gen came in, that the internal structures of race teams were going to change because you didn't need guys hanging bodies or building chassis. Obviously, teams had to rejigger how they built a better mousetrap. Has that had an effect in that? I mean, those guys have very specific roles. Obviously, like if you hang a body or you build a chassis, like you'd have to like sort of adapt your skill set to what's needed in NASCAR 2022 and beyond. But like, does the marketplace changing with those employees coming in, has that affected things?
Yes, it really has. I think if you take the number of employees that currently operate within the NASCAR spectrum, it has shrunk dramatically because of the car. But I'm going to give credit to the owners, the engine manufacturers, some other people that in Charlotte, I'm going to use Charlotte as a general term, but the Charlotte area, Mooresville area, where most of the race teams are, has not dissipated really any of the race teams. They're all still here, but it's also generated this new high-end manufacturing opportunity. I talked to friends of mine that used to be in the in the racing space. Now I talk to them, and I was just talking to a friend of mine at Hendrick the other day. I'm like, so you're still over there? Which building you in? Like, we're reminiscing. He goes, oh, I now work on the military program. And I was like, okay, explain. And I think what we now see, and I talked to a friend of mine up at Doug Yates' building. And I'm like, so are you still in engines? Nope, I'm purely on manufacturing now. I'm like, oh, well, what do you manufacture? And they, what NASCAR is, it's similar to like the military. When I say that, I mean that it's unique, right? It's this little group of people that grow up in this world where only thing that matters is results on Sunday. And it's different. They don't teach you that in college. They don't teach you that anywhere else. So they get this mindset of how to do things. So now we have this entire pool of the most talented men and women in the world that are great at making short run ones or fives or tens or 20s of something to this precise level that no one in the real world needs, right? If you're going to buy a folding chair, you need the folding chair to be cheap so you can sell 10,000 of them. Well, we hear a lot of space stuff. We hear a lot of technological companies. We hear satellites. We hear military. There are now these businesses, spinoffs of all these owners. I'm not going to go into each one, but there's many of them. And I applaud the owners. Now, look, I'm sure did it for a financial gain, right? They're trying to create another business, but that doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is all the friends I have that used to be in the sport, some still work in the sport and others work in this other area. And to me, that's what's most important. And these people love their jobs and they still go to work on a Monday morning and they still have this passion to create parts and pieces, except for going on race cars. It's going into other, I'll call it small run, because it's not hundred thousands of anything. It's like small run, really high end things. And as the world shifts, Charlotte and Mooresville is becoming known. If you're going to start a website, you probably go to Silicon Valley, right? Not that I know, but that's from the Netflix rumors and, all the different stuff you watch. That's where it's at. Well, if you want high-end manufacturing now, this is becoming this epicenter that if, within a 5-mile drive of Mooresville, you can go to 5 different companies that can quote, if you need 100 of something machined to a level that no one else can do in the world, they exist right here in Mecklenburg and Cabarrus, Catawba County, right in this little area.
That's fascinating. So just diversification of race teams, or racing is still the primary goal.
It used to be required to win races and say, who else needs this skill set? Build it and they will come, right? Let's build these companies that can fabricate, that can machine, that can build something, right? If you're an inventor in the middle of the world and you're ready to build your option 2.0 tractor implement and you need somebody that could build something high-end off blueprints, there are now these companies that say, oh yeah, we could build 10 of those. Here's what it's going to cost. These guys are building the most precise racing vehicles in the country. And now they're taking those skill sets to precise other things, whatever those may be.
And that's all about
crazy stuff. Like I get these stories and I'm like, what is this? Well, this is a door on a ship that accesses this. What is this? Well, this is a part that's going to go on a satellite that go, like the stories are pretty fascinating of all the stuff these people are building.
Well, it was like you were saying, like you don't need a folding chair to be precise to the thousandths of an inch, but some of those other applications you're talking about, you would, and that's all a byproduct of what we were talking about at the outset with these teams working in such fine margins with those optical scanning machines that require them to be like right on it. And so this is all a byproduct of the precision that's required to race in Cup nowadays.
It's redefining American manufacturing. Right? Why we hear a lot about some of the biggest factories closing down for whatever reasons that are over my head and you and I don't need to get into. It now is redefining, at least in this little pocket of North Carolina, that we have multiple places that can build small run, very precise pieces. And I think that's, I'm proud to be a part of it. Racing is a great thing, but when you hear of your friend in Mooresville who's building a part and it's going to go on something that goes in space, you're like, man, that's pretty cool. That was made in Mooresville, North Carolina.
That is a cool story to tell. I'm glad we got to explore that. But as I mentioned, it's playoff time, so I want to get back to the playoffs a little bit and zoom in particularly on the driver who has had the most points, stage points and race points through the first half of the playoffs. Of course, it's Alex Bowman. Everybody had that going in. The guy everybody said, like, hey, are you sure you can be driving for this team next year? He's the guy who has scored 13 more points than any other driver in the playoffs so far at 189. As I said, he leads in stage points. He's got 58, 6 more than William Byron. Alex Bowman, Stevie, entered the playoffs on a streak of 4 consecutive finishes outside the top 15. Did anyone see this coming, especially given all of the speculation and everything he was dealing with coming into Atlanta and media day and getting all these questions about, how confident are you that you get to keep the number 48 next year?
This is probably the most Alex Bowman thing we've ever seen. This is a guy that wins 1, 2, 3 races a year, and you're like, where was he running? Like, how did he do it? And as one of the analysts that perhaps overlooks Alex Bowman too much in his years past, I think I also overlooked his injury. And I've said this before, and I'm guilty. So I'm going to put myself in this bucket of the machine moves on. And, so he breaks his back or has a back injury. I'm not sure the correct technology in a sprint car. Misses some time. Then he has to sit out with a concussion. And, we're guilty of it. The sport moves on. Alex Bowman can't. He has this injury that he has to recover from. And, head injuries are so complicated because it's not an X-ray. We can't put the X-ray online and be like, see right here, when this bone connects to this bone, he's going to be back and he's going to be racing and he's going to tape it up and go. And I didn't realize any of this until the emotion of Alex Bowman when he won at Chicago. And he instantly went back to those injuries. This is what I'm leading into is his comments. And he's like, paraphrasing, people didn't believe in me. I'm not sure I believed in myself at times, but I'm back. I'm healthy. I'm here. And look what I've done. And then to your point, we go to media day and then they double down and every question about his job, not about the playoffs that he entered by winning Chicago, like completely overlooked. So I'm going to give credit to the 48 team. I've been part of the rebuilding, of Jeff Gordon when we couldn't win and then rebuilding Dale Jr., right? I've been a part of these things that a lot of people talk about, but nobody understands the emotional toll when you're in that cyclone of rebuilding or trying to not fail. And so I'm going to give crew chief leadership, whether that's Chad Knaus, Jeff Gordon, I don't know who, but I'm sure there's someone at Hendrick that is helping prop this team up as well. And I'm going to give the most credit to Alex Bowman because he is in the world of distraction, having an amazing playoff run, and I don't see it cooling off. He is, when I say you have to have firepower in the round of 8 to win in advance, he's the one saying maybe you don't. I mean, he's so consistent in points that I'm like, well, if this continues, you're not going to be able to eliminate this guy on points. He scores so many points and does it very quietly. So I didn't have it predicted to answer your original question, but I'm glad we're celebrating it because I don't have a favorite out there. Look, I'd like to see Kyle Busch win to extend his 20-year streak. People can call me whatever they want. The guy deserves it. I want to see it.
Yep.
I want to see Martin Truex Jr. win because he's been such an ambassador to the sport. I like to have his moment in the sun where he's celebrated one more time. Other than that, I don't care. I really don't. I just want it to be a good race. I want it to be a clean race, a fair race, and I want to see good racing. So I'm going to celebrate Alex Bowman for what he's doing the same way I celebrated Kyle Larson when he led 1,000 laps in a 500-lap race at Bristol, right? Like the guy didn't stop. So it's not flashy like Kyle Larson, but it is getting the job done. And bravo, Alex Bowman.
Yeah. So Bowman was one of these 9 drivers who have broken winless streaks of at least 42 races. You just mentioned a couple of others that we'd like to see it. Kyle Busch sits at 52 races without a win. He's not a playoff driver, Steve, but he's been right there really since the last 2 races before the playoffs, where he almost got in with a win. Your voice has been echoing in my head because whenever I see him running well, because you've been saying this since midseason, that even when he was in a slump in the dog days of summer, you felt like he was going to break out of it. We're seeing signs of it. Do you think that Kyle Busch breaks through over the last 5 races and continues a streak of 20 seasons with at least 1 victory?
So I'm going to argue both sides of the fence. I'm going to start with my heart and say, yes, he's going to break out of it. He's going to win. He's really, really close. I think we're starting to see some speed. Really, since the Olympic break, the RCR camp has been very, very good. Remember Austin Dillon, a lot was made of that race because of the wreck, as it should have been. But he was the dominant car before that. So he had the raw speed that you have. Now, when I put my emotion away and I go over to my analyst hat, my fear is if you don't capitalize when you can, the opportunities will fleet and disappear. And that's my fear for Kyle Busch. It's great to say, man, he was second, wrecked at Kansas. And I'm like, yeah, coulda. You run out of couldas. Like from a guy who lost way more than he won, as most do in this sport, you go back to the ones that you could have. Those hurt the most because rarely, I know we don't say it's rarely because Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin, and there's a certain group that make it look like it's so easy to be this good. It isn't. And, Kyle Busch had Kansas. Caution wasn't coming, like no caution, which was for him. So it's a human sport, and I'm not going to judge a man by one mistake he's made later, but it was a mistake. And he said it in his own thing. He got in a bad spot. The air shut off. We can blame the car, the air, whatever. They're all driving the same car on the same track. Those circumstances are for everyone. And Kyle Busch is just an artist, man. He's so good at what he does. And he just put himself in a position that rarely do you see. And he got into the wall. So my fear for Kyle is, are the chances disappearing? How many chances do you get? Because I believe, go back to your statement about all these different winners, maybe the Roval, and then the time is over. When we go in the round of 8, the 8 drivers that wake up still with a chance to win a championship, I think we're going to see a level that we have yet to see. I think they're going to find a new level of domination where you're going to have 4 or 5 of those 8 drivers in the top 5 every lap of every race. There's a reason the same names make it to this point in the playoffs so many times. And it's kind of like survive round 1, survive round 2. When you go to round 3, it's not survive, it's advance. And you don't advance by surviving, you advance by winning. And I think we're going to see a new level of aggression.
I want to get to that and talk about some of those favorites and some of those tracks. But before we get there, unfortunately, I feel like we got to touch on this, Stevie, because it's been a theme of the playoffs for the last few races with NASCAR officiating, particularly as it relates to the damaged vehicle policy. Ryan Blaney at Watkins Glen, very upset that he didn't have a chance for his car to get towed back and put new tires on it and see if they could fix it. NASCAR declared him out of the race after a wreck. Josh Berry at Kansas, same thing. After much consternation, they towed him in the infield. He was pretty much retired from the race. And then at Talladega, the rule, as I understand it, has always been that since NASCAR went to this DVP, that if you're involved in an incident and you can't drive it back, you're essentially out of the race. That's what crew chiefs seem to understand. But at Talladega, it was applied differently. We saw some cars that were brought back from an incident for the first time. And there have been some crew chiefs this week. Adam Stevens said on Sirius XM that, he wasn't aware that this rule had changed. What's happening here? Because you have a special insight to this.
All right, so let's go back to the beginning. I'm going to give, for the listener, I apologize, but to tell the whole story and the whole truth, we have to go back to where it started. The damage vehicle policy was created because it put the teams on a limited amount of time on pit road, and the goal was for 2 real big reasons. 1, to eliminate cars with parts and pieces taped on, driving around the racetrack with debris blowing off, affecting the outcome for the other competitors. 2, this isn't talked about a lot, but there have definitely been cars that have rejoined races that should have been out for the safety of the driver. There are some heavy damaged vehicles that us crew chiefs can MacGyver together and get back out there for points. And it has put drivers in positions where they shouldn't be on the racetrack. That car's been in multiple wrecks. It needs to be over. There's the damaged vehicle policy. With the old car, it was very simple. It was easy because no matter how, if you couldn't drive it back, your day was done because the car would recover itself pretty easily. Fast forward to the new car. We now see this phenomenon of flat tires. The car is unable to drive back. So now a perfectly good race car spins down the backstretch, blows 4 tires, hits nothing. And now we all agree in the industry, well, this is dumb. This car shouldn't be out of the race because it hasn't hit anything. So then the adjustment then becomes, it's in NASCAR's discretion whether you had more than slight contact. So first of all, that's an awful rule. Who wants to officiate a rule that is purely a judgment call from perhaps 2 miles away in a tower or using videos? I've raced my whole life. I absolutely do not want to be the judge and the jury on whether Josh Berry had more than slight contact and something is broke or not broken. Ryan Blaney's car got towed back at Watkins Glen to the garage. They are furious. The damage done to it, the steering rack was broken off. His day was over. So the rule officiated correctly, not a good rule, officiated correctly, was correct for Ryan Blaney. Then we go to Kansas. I haven't seen the car myself, so this is at least secondhand information. But from everything I read, very little damage to none on the 4 car. It could have continued. I'm going to believe Rodney Childers for the tweets he sent out. So now, rule still officiated correctly, but it doesn't taste good. You're like, Josh Berry, SHR brought all this stuff up. So a lot of questions. I was one of them. I went to NASCAR. I said, what are we going to do about this? Is this going to change? And where the frustration for Talladega is this. No, we can't really change it until the end of the year. We've got this far in. And while I don't like it, I was on board with that. I said, you know what? I hate to say it, but I do think the rule needs to change. I don't know why we can't change it this week, but if they say we can't, we can't. Then we go to Talladega, and it's officiated completely different. And that's when everyone starts losing their mind, because it doesn't matter if you change or don't change the letter of the rule. If you officiate it differently, then there's been a rule change. I don't care what the paperwork says. And in my opinion, many cars had more than slight contact at Talladega. And in years past, they would have been towed, or races past, they would have been towed to the garage and their day would have ended. Once again, I don't like that. I don't like that rule. I think we can do better, but I don't make the rules. That's how it should have been officiated.
Yeah.
At Talladega, NASCAR has decided, after the bad look of Josh Berry, that we're going to officiate the same rule differently. I think their intent was to, I guess, stay out of it, or maybe not retire good cars, but changing anything has now put you in the middle of it. It didn't take you out of it. It put you right in the middle of it. So I didn't like it. I think it could have been, if we go back to Monday before Talladega, I'm okay with if they came out on Monday and said, after review of Josh Berry, but we're not going to change the wording, but guys, just the garage, we want you to know that the tie is going to go to the driver. If he leaves his window net up, that tells me that the guy who rode, the only guy who maybe knows, the guy that was in the vehicle, that felt all the bangs, and he has the throttle and he has the steering, if he leaves his window net up, then that's the driver saying, I didn't feel a hit big enough that I should be out of this race. I'm going to believe this guy. He's wrecked before. We're going to believe him. Then us, NASCAR, will bring you back to your pit stall, we'll put you on the DVP, and that's how we're going to do it. If they would have just said that on Monday, then everything we talked about in Talladega would have been fine.
Yeah.
But to come out after Talladega and say, well, in light of Kansas, and I'm like, whoa. What do you mean in light of Kansas? You're now deciding who gets repaired and who doesn't. And how can the teams operate within a changing landscape? And so let's go all the way back to our original conversation about technology and covering the races. This is the glaring opportunity that when this system, and in every sport, I don't care if it's college football playoffs, I don't care if it's Major League Baseball playoffs, sports in general has found a way to build a structure that has made it so awesome for the fan. Because we have taken the vice and we have closed it on every participant. And their human reaction to the pressure of performance, thus is sports. In this crazy world where there's so many things that we can agree or disagree upon, the normal person goes to sports to find their entertainment. To let the world go away in the background, you get to focus on sport, whatever it is. And drivers and teams and people have found this employment of trying to perform in this vice of pressure. Well, that pressure needs to be felt throughout the industry. On television, I feel it, that I have an obligation to cover what's happening to every playoff car, because whether it's Daniel Suarez, who had a penalty early, Ryan Blaney, who got in a wreck, or, Denny Hamlin, who gained points because of the wreck, I have an obligation to their fans to tell the story because they've given us their time on television and we owe it to them. Well, the officials, like, I don't basketball, baseball, this is not a NASCAR thing. They're going to be under the most scrutiny, and that's why it's talked about. And I think that, this is a good thing. I know people don't want to hear this, but arguing about the officials is the most sports thing ever happened in the world of sports, right? Wasn't a flag. It wasn't this. It wasn't that. So I encourage the fans to agree or disagree. I'm not here to hold water for anybody, right? It's like, hey, man, if you don't like it, speak up. Go on your chat boards and say you thought it was a bad call. If you like it, say it was talk about it. Yeah. We're not trying to hide anything. But I do believe it doesn't matter what the rule is. If you officiate the rule differently, the rule has changed. And with everything on the line, there were cars that were towed back that I don't believe would have been in other races. And therefore, that's really the challenge of this situation. I don't know the answer. I don't think it's that hard. Tow them to the garage, start your DVP when they're in the garage and say, hey, man, because look, for the people that say, well, just tow them all to pit road. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. Now we're going to have 10-minute yellow flags because we got to tow all these. It's not a decision in a silo, right? It's not as easy as we all want to make it sound, but just because it's not easy doesn't mean it can't be changed. Welcome to the world we live in.
And is this a case of, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, as they always say, that there was so much discussion about this the last few weeks, especially after Berry at Kansas, that
right.
NASCAR looks at this and thought, oh, well, he's a non-playoff driver. What if this were to happen with playoff implications, championship implications? Was the goal here to try to, I guess, ameliorate that? Not to excuse the way NASCAR handled this, because I don't think it was a great look, but were their intentions good in what they were trying to do?
So I do believe their intentions were good. My question back to you is, if they would have said what they said post-race, pre-race, would your opinion of the wreck have changed?
Right. It would, right? I mean, if you understood,
right? What I heard after the race, sounds like a reaction,
right?
But I know the people talking, and I believe in their hearts they had these internal discussions and they shifted their approach. I actually don't feel their actions were as egregious as their communication.
Yeah,
like I think
there's transparency needed. They got to have transparency when they're dealing with these types of issues, right?
I think if I think that if there would have been a Friday morning presser in Talladega where NASCAR would have gone up and kind of gave us the, shift of the sport and said, hey, after the last few weeks, we're going to do this, and this. You're going to see this. This is going to look different. We're going to see this. We've communicated to the teams, or go up there and say, we are going to do this differently, but not in the playoffs because we feel we've got to this point and who's in and who's out has been adjusted by accidents throughout the year. So whether we don't like it or do like it, we're going to continue to just call it as we've seen. I don't care, but just give me some sort of answer.
Yeah.
After the race to tell me, well, after Kansas, we adjusted. That's a tough look.
Yeah. Yeah. Without telling anybody, including the teams who obviously need to know. So looking back at the playoffs, 5 races to go. It's a little bit of a return to normalcy. We're speaking here before the Roval, but after the Roval, you have 2 mile-and-a-halves in Vegas and Homestead, Miami Speedway. You've got a couple of what people might call short tracks, Martinsville, Phoenix, sort of debatable, but still a 1 mile oval. Do we see more of kind of a regression to the mean or whatever you would say? Like you kind of said earlier, Roval will be Kyle Busch's last chance. Playoff drivers now rise to the top, especially round of 8 and the championship race.
I do believe so. One reason is, now we haven't eliminated the group yet, but if it stays very similar, I think a lot of our mile-and-a-half race wins are still in the playoffs. I look at Larson, Hamlin, Byron, Bell. There's this firepower in the playoffs where I just think there's too many very good teams and drivers still alive that I do think we're going to see this move up. I also think that, it used to be once we started the playoffs, the non-playoff guys really kind of, you could almost see it out the window. They would coin flip would go to the playoff driver. And I believe that a couple of years ago that went away in the first round. And then maybe a year ago, it kind of went away in the second round. And I don't think and last year we saw it go away in the championship race. Ross Chastain basically raced Ryan Blaney how he saw fit, won the race. I don't think he did anything wrong. But barring a few exceptions, I do think the majority of the field, the coin flip is going to go to the playoff driver. Some of that reason is because as we start to see playoff teammates eliminated, they're going to get out of their own teammates' way, right? So the field itself becomes a little bit weaker. But yeah, so I think we're going to start to see the playoff guys kind of rise back up and stand on the top of the podium.
And I know you said, you don't really have a favorite. You don't really want to handicap it too much. And I appreciate that perspective because, hey, I mean, there's been no dominant driver really. I mean, Larson's looked really good. He's been leading the series throughout the season in wins. Byron's locked into the next round and seems to have recovered some of his early season mojo. But the guy I wanted to ask you about, Stevie, and kind of wrap up here, like Denny Hamlin, I think obviously remains the big mystery here. I mean, he's 13th in stage points in the playoffs, 9th in points scored. Strategy didn't go his way clearly at Atlanta. At Kansas, his team made mistakes. He said mentally he felt like it was tough to be in the game in that race. Talladega, things look really bleak until the crash with 5 to go, and that totally changes the game. Where is Denny Hamlin in the number 11 team here with this driver still trying to win that first championship and everybody always talking about that 5 races to go? Where do you think the number 11 is?
Well, I think what Alabama football learned is if you let an opponent stay around long enough, they're going to surprise you. And, a tip of the hat to my son's college at Vanderbilt, and Denny Hamlin is the same way. I wonder if in 3 weeks, a bunch of guys in the playoffs said we should have eliminated him when we could. We should have stepped on his throat when we had him down because there's 2 ways to look at Denny Hamlin. What in the heck is going on? Because this is the most non-11 run in the playoffs we've ever seen. Or I can't believe they're still in it. God forbid if they get it figured out, this is going to be unbelievable. And I don't have the answer. I will say this. Now that the lawsuit announcement and all this other off-track stuff is public, Denny looked the most comfortable in front of the media at Talladega than he's looked in quite some time. Personal opinion. And I wonder, remember, this off-track distraction, we have all just learned about it, but there's no way this was a 24-hour decision, right? I don't know what it is. I'm not going to get in the timeline. None of that matters to me. But I think you and I can both agree this takes an emotional toll and a time toll and a physical toll for anyone who's a part of these conversations. So now that it's kind of out there in the world, can he just be the driver of the 11? Can he put his helmet on? So Jimmy Johnson said it the best on air on NBC this last week. He said, I believe in my career, this is Jimmy Johnson speaking, that when I put my helmet on, I was just a driver. But what I noticed was that my bandwidth to put up with things shrunk. He said, so I could be just a driver, but if somebody cut me off, I was on the edge of road rage, where in other races, I would be more patient. And he goes, looking back on his career, he attributes that to the off-track distraction, right? You could compartmentalize it, but the damage is still done in your emotional toll. You're still right there on the edge. And, you know, Denny has really not had a whole lot go his way in the playoff. He needed to have a moment at Bristol, and he did it. Well, now here we are in the second round. He doesn't really have to have a moment at the Roval. He just needs to go not hit anything. And, you know, Chris Gabehart, I think, is one of the best leaders. You know, when they leave the Roval still in it, can he throw some cold water on the face of his driver and be like, hey, man, I need 4 weeks of your time. That's all I need. I need 1 month to change a line item on your resume that people are going to be talking about while you're in the Hall of Fame. So can you please give me 4 weeks? And I think that can happen. I think, you know, the out of office, hey, I'm out of office. I'll get back to you on Wednesday. I think owner of 2311 can be out of office for 4 weeks. And for that reason, I think he could be dangerous. But, you know, I don't have a favorite to your point because I have a pro and con of everybody.
Yeah.
I have the same opinion on Chase Elliott. Yeah, let him hang around. Good luck. You know, Kyle Larson, William Byron, Christopher Bell. Like, the list is pretty easy to generate a pros and cons for everybody. And that's why I'm as fascinated for these playoffs as anybody.
Yeah. Be a lot to watch these final 5 races starting Sunday, Charlotte Motor Speedway Roval on NBC. And this is the man who'll be delivering some of that coverage. Stevie, always appreciate you joining the NASCAR NBC podcast. Thanks for being here.
Appreciate you having me. It's been a great run of races. We got 5 to go to crown a champ.
Hi, I'm Parker Kligerman. For more access like this from Pit Road, be sure to click and subscribe to the Motorsports on NBC YouTube channel.